In early 2022, India banned Free Fire, one of the largest mobile games in the world, developed by Singaporean company Garena. That was the time when India cited national security concerns and had banned TikTok, a popular video sharing platform, along with more than 260 other Chinese apps. How did Free Fire get caught in the crossfire? Well, Garena's parent company is Singapore-listed CLTD, which also owns Shopee, a popular e-commerce marketplace across Southeast Asia. India took a hard stance reportedly because Chinese e-commerce and gaming giant Tencent had a significant investment in the Singaporean company. CLTD's founders were born in mainland China but were naturalized Singapore citizens. Welcome to Strategy TLDR. In this episode, can we expect a change in India's engagement with China? Could Chinese companies and investment be more welcome in India now? Is there a proven international business and investment strategy behind it? What gives a hint that there is a possible change in thinking in the corridors of power in New Delhi? The 2024 edition of the Economic Survey of India says, and I quote, "Focusing on FDI from China seems more promising for boosting India's exports to the US, similar to how East Asian economies did in the past." Now, this report is not published by any private think tank in India. It is published by the Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance of the Government of India under the supervision of the Chief Economic Advisor. The current Chief Economic Advisor, Mr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, should know about role of FDI in boosting exports of the Southeast Asian economies because he was a long-term resident of Singapore before he took up the job in New Delhi. Will opening doors for export-oriented Chinese FDI give the much-needed boost to the decade-old Make in India idea? Is the current global business climate conducive for it? Picture this. It's 2024, and the global manufacturing chessboard has been dramatically rearranged over the last decade. Major multinational companies are making strategic moves, looking to de-risk their operations from China. This shift, dubbed the China Plus One strategy, is reshaping global supply chains and creating unprecedented opportunities for countries like India. But why is this happening? The answer lies in a perfect storm of factors we all have lived through in recent years. COVID-19 disruptions exposed the vulnerabilities of China-centric global supply chains across multiple industries. US-China tensions have added a layer of geopolitical uncertainty, and rising costs in China have companies searching for more cost-effective alternatives. This isn't just speculation. We're seeing real-world examples of this shift. Did you know that 90% of North American manufacturers have already moved some or all their production to countries like Mexico, Thailand, and Vietnam? The Economic Survey has also cited this from a report published by the global consulting company BCG in 2023. It's a fundamental shift from what the world had seen earlier since the millennium. Now let's turn our attention to India. With its large domestic consumer market and growing focus on smartphone manufacturing, India is positioning itself as an attractive destination for these relocating companies. The government's production-linked incentive, PLI scheme, offering tax breaks and subsidies, has sweetened the deal for global electronic giants. And the results? They're starting to show. Apple, the tech giant, assembled about a seventh of its global iPhone production, worth $14 billion in India, in the fiscal year 2024. Foxconn, Apple's long-standing partner and a major electronics manufacturer, has set up shop in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. But here's where it gets really interesting. India's electronic exports are undergoing a remarkable transformation. There is a shift from a trade deficit to a surplus with the United States. Mobile phone exports to the US more than doubled from $2.2 billion in fiscal year 2023 to $5.7 billion in 2024. That's in just 1 year. So how can India capitalize on this momentum and deepen its involvement in global value chains, GVCs? The answer might lie in learning from the key strategies of East Asian economies. Over time, they have focused on reducing trade costs and facilitating foreign investment. India is already making strides in improving logistical efficiency, as evidenced by its rising score in the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index. The Economic Survey points out that India is focusing on integrating its value chain with the West, particularly in sectors like renewable energy, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and next-generation telecommunications. But the report also acknowledges that India can't ignore the elephant in the room, China. It highlights that the reality of the China Plus One strategy is that it's not about completely moving away from China. Countries like Mexico, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Korea have increased their exports to the US, while simultaneously seeing a rise in Chinese FDI. It's not an either-or situation. It's about finding the right balance. This brings us to a crucial crossroads for India. The report itself highlights two main options: integrate into China's supply chain or promote FDI from China. And here's the kicker: focusing on FDI might be the more promising route for boosting India's exports to the US, similar to how East Asian economies did in the past. It's more advantageous than relying solely on trade, especially considering that China is already India's top import partner, with a growing trade deficit. To give you a context, India's imports from China were about $102 billion, compared to less than $17 billion of exports. By attracting Chinese FDI, India could potentially address this trade imbalance. Instead of importing finished goods from China, it could have Chinese companies invest in India, manufacture, and export from there. It's a win-win situation that could boost its manufacturing sector, importing capital, FDI, from China. India is not alone in considering this approach. The economic survey points out that Brazil and Turkey have raised barriers to Chinese EV imports but are actively attracting Chinese FDI in the sector. Several European nations are following a similar playbook. But why does this strategy work so well? From East Asia to Latin America, across the rest of Asia, and EU countries, the answer lies in a fascinating business concept called social complexity. Imagine a web of relationships, trust, and reputation that a company builds over time. These intangible assets are just as crucial as physical manufacturing capabilities, if not more so. They're what business strategists call socially complex resources, and they're incredibly hard for competitors to replicate. Let's take Foxconn as an example. This Taiwanese contract manufacturer has built a sterling reputation with Apple for its high-quality manufacturing capabilities. When Foxconn set up shop in China, it didn't just bring its machines, it brought its relationship with Apple and its world-class capabilities. Now, as Foxconn expands to countries like Vietnam and India, it's carrying this valuable social capital with it. This principle extends far beyond just Foxconn. Across scores of industries, Chinese manufacturers have established themselves as trusted partners for famous global brands. They've cultivated relationships, built reputations, and honed cutting-edge manufacturing capabilities that their multinational customers have come to rely on. Now here's where it gets interesting for countries like India. When these Chinese manufacturers set up operations in new locations, they bring along their established relationships and reputations. For their global customers, it's a much easier decision to accept products made by their current trusted supplier in a new location than to take a chance on a completely new supplier in a new country. Here is the evidence from a source, India Briefing, dated April 2024, cited in the Economic Survey. It lists Foxconn, Pegatron, and Wistron as the end-to-end contract manufacturers of iPhones in India. They are all Apple's global contract manufacturing partners from Taiwan. The same source also lists Apple's component suppliers located across India. Even a cursory glance shows that they are Taiwanese and Chinese companies linked to Foxconn and other contract manufacturers via investments or other relationships. This social complexity creates a unique opportunity. By attracting Chinese FDI, India isn't just getting factories and jobs. It's tapping into established global supply chains and customer relationships. It's a shortcut to global manufacturing excellence that would take decades to build from scratch. A recent update to the above list of iPhone manufacturers could possibly be a hint to that start. In end 2023, the Indian conglomerate Tata Group took over Wistron's iPhone manufacturing facilities. Interestingly, Wistron was the manufacturing arm of the Taiwanese computer electronics giant Acer. Talking of Taiwan and China in global electronics and semiconductor business, do not miss our channel's earlier episode, Why China Loses Billions in Semiconductor Chip Business. As we wrap up, it's clear that India needs to find the right balance between importing goods from China and importing capital in the form of FDI. It's a delicate dance, but one that could potentially catalyze the Make in India initiative.